Your Life Should Be a Movie even before she passed away. When did you first become aware of her, and what attracted you to playing her?
I think that the sad thing was is that when Marie was, people were saying to her that, thanks so much for coming, by the way. It's really means a lot. There wasn't an ending to the story, you know, when people were talking to her about making a film of her life, and then tragically, an ending came, and so there was an opportunity. I mean, it was a combination of the story, the script, the woman, and the chance to work with Matthew Heineman, because I knew that with Matthew directing this film, because his background is documentary, and his experience is in the same sort of regions that Marie covered, that Marie would have a representation in a way that I think she would feel was authentic to her experience. And I thought, without someone like Matthew, you know, you might just have a film about a kind of fearless, swashbuckling war reporter, and that's not really who Marie was. I mean, she didn't really want to be the centre of the story herself, as many correspondents don't. And I think Matthew, as you see in the film, you know, allows so many of the people that she was interviewing to speak their own truths and their own stories, which is something I think Marie would have been very proud of. And I knew that he was going to have a very penetrating look at the flaws of this woman and the humanity of her and the vulnerability as well as the fierceness. And I think that's what makes her fascinating to me. It's this bundle of contradictions that she was, you know, so fierce in her pursuit of a story, and yet so kind of, you know, crushingly empty and ridden with PTSD at some points, and you know how sort of the deep empathy and the sort of beautiful way she would protect people and take great care with people's stories, and yet she could be so cavalier with her own life, you know. And I think all those contradictions really spoke to me.
And Matthew, he was an Oscar nominee for Cartel Land, one of his many great documentaries, but this is his first time doing a narrative film, which is strange because it is documentary-like. It feels so real. How was he with the actors? I mean, I knew it would look terrific, but I'm really, really impressed by the performances he helped get.
I mean, he and I were sort of really, really close collaborators. You know, there's a lot of talk, I think, about trust in our business, you know, and whether you and this film really tested that, and it really, you know, I couldn't have done it if I hadn't really deeply trusted Matthew, you know, sort of felt, you know, because I had to go to places that were quite scary and, you know, I mean, emotionally, I suppose. And you need to have a director that you trust with that. If you're going to open up fully, you know, really nakedly, not just physically, but mentally, you know, you need to really feel the trust. And I think he wished he could have made a documentary about Marie. You know, I think that they would have been an amazing partnership. So I felt this tremendous responsibility to give him something as close as I could get to the subject that he would have observed if he was doing a documentary. That was really the only thing I cared about, was giving him a Marie that he could watch and observe and live with and take time with, as he would have done if she had been alive and he was making a documentary. You know, and he was careful and protective of me, and ours was the sort of closest relationship on the set, I think, really, and maybe his and Bob Richardson too. But I couldn't have done it without him, and it was months, you know, we prepared for months, really. We met in March and we started filming in November, and, you know, we were constantly building this character, building something, getting closer and closer to the truth of her. You know, he'd come to London and we'd sit in my house and we'd do stuff, and you know, there were nights that I'd ring him up at 1 a.m. saying, I can't do this, I don't think I'm going to get close enough, and you know, you feel some fear.
And one of the things I know he did was he cast non-actors in this movie. He cast some actual refugees, people who saw and experienced. Oh, sorry, I thought you said you couldn't hear me. Siri's giving me attitude. Yes. But you know, people who experienced horrible things.
Non-actors, she says.
What?
Sorry.
But like, what was it like, you know, working alongside them when they've actually, you know, lived some of these experiences?
So you've just seen the film. We filmed everything in the conflict zones in Jordan, and all the background of our film is made up of largely refugees from the conflict zones that we were depicting, who are currently living in Jordan. And Matt interviewed all of them personally. You know, and that is not often how a film is cast, certainly not for the background. And you know, it was so profound, basically. I mean, when we did the scene of the mass grave, when Marie hired a digger on an instinct to go to this place where she believed bodies were held, there were Iraqi women, the Iraqi women draped in black, and you know, at the beginning of the day, these women were sort of clamoring to be who was going to be near the front, and if I'm near the front, am I going to get more money, and you know, when am I going to get my lunch, and you know, all these concerns that are very important on a, you know, and then suddenly the digger started to dig, and there was this moment where the jaws went into the ground and the first remains came up, and suddenly it was like there was this cry went up, which is in the movie. It still raises the hairs on my arms, actually, and suddenly there was no question of self-reflection or being in a movie. Suddenly the scene, the truth of the scene took over, and as people, you know, we've probably all experienced, but people who don't make movies don't realize that you can reach this level of authenticity where your body feels it's real, you know. So suddenly these women started to, you know, beat their chests, and tears came, and the momentum of the scene just took over. There was no take two, because once the ground is dug up, you can't go back. Well, certainly not in our budget, we couldn't go back. And Bob Richardson, our cameraman, just went with the story as it came about through people's reliving of, I guess, their own traumas. And the same was true when we were filming in Syria, and the women in the basement, where all the women and children in Homs were sheltering in this one basement. And I went in on the day to film that scene, and Matt said, okay, you know, these women, many of these women were in Homs. Could you raise your hand if you're Syrian? And 90% of the women raised their hands. Raise your hand if you were in Homs. You know, 70% of them were actually there. And I could move through that room with a translator, and those were their stories, you know. So when that woman looked at me and told me about her child under the rubble, I didn't know that was coming. I didn't know that was being given to me in that moment. I didn't know what was coming, and it gives you a huge insight into the life of the war correspondent, because you realise you're being given these sort of, you know, someone's deepest truth and feeling to take care of and handle and get out, you know, and also, you know, you feel it deeply, but it's not yours to feel, so where do you put it? So that made huge impact on me when it came to then exploring what she's left with when she's back in London, you know. But that woman, then there was this point where she said to me, and it's in there, you know, she speaks in her own words, so she says, you know, I don't want this to be just words in your paper, I want the world to know this story. And I thought, my God, this has completely blurred the line between reality. She's forgotten in this minute, or doesn't realise that I'm an actress, and I'm, in this moment, I am the journalist, and I am in charge of her story. And the cameras are not there, and it's just her and me and my notepad. It was quite profound, really.
I mean, when you're shooting these intense scenes, I usually ask actors sort of how do they shake that off at the end of the day, but I don't know that you can.
Well, look at me now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny, you know, you relive it, and I feel it through me, and it must be, you know, and I've seen a fraction of what Marie had 4 decades of this constantly. Can you imagine? I mean,
no, I literally can't.
It's and because she worked for a Sunday paper, she had the time to go in deep, you know. She had the time to spend a day or an afternoon talking to someone and learning, you know, really empathizing with them. And which, if she was working for a daily paper or had a program that she had to, you know, get out for the 6 p.m. broadcast or whatever, she couldn't have done. So I mean, yeah, I think these characters, they stay with you. They really do. Yeah.
How did you even go about preparing to play her? Because on one hand, I think sometimes people like it when they're playing a real person because there's so much to draw on. but the weight of that responsibility, and I just have to say, I know someone who knew Marie, and they said when her voice comes on at the end, they didn't realize it was her. They thought it was you throughout, that it was like really uncanny.
The way to play Marie was a huge responsibility. One, because when I started to interview her friends and family, I realised that there was huge resistance to a film being made in the first place because her death was so recent and so painfully recent, and she was loved so fiercely that, you know, and that was tough. And then gradually, bit by bit, I sort of was put in the position of the journalist winning their trust and getting them to trust me. And it wasn't easy, but sometimes the things that are harder won are more rewarding in the long run, because when the truth comes, it's all the more profound. You know, the friend started off trying to sort of steer me away from her alcoholism. You know, started saying, you know, really, if she was addicted to anything, it was coffee. And I was like, okay, right, that's interesting. And then a few weeks later, it would come and they'd tell me about her, you know, on her bike, cycling the wrong way over the Hammersmith flyover, which is a kind of quite a dangerous sort of old bit of road in London, cycling against the traffic and, you know, nearly killing herself and because she was so drunk. But also she's someone who I kind of fell in love with watching her, because she's such a, more than almost anyone I've studied, she's the physical embodiment of her life. You know, it's in her shoulders, it's in the tension in her body, it's in these, you know, she had this wonderful sort of freedom, but it was almost like a kind of puppet on a, you know, she'd hinge from her waist, and she had these hands that would gesture but with a sort of rigidity, and I used to tie pipe cleaners between my fingers to keep when I was in a rehearsal room alone working on her, you know, to sort of keep my fingers apart, and then I'd put gaffer tape around my upper body to because she'd keep her arms very close in, but from the elbow down she would gesture quite a lot, and so I found different ways to hold the tension in my body, to make my body feel like hers. And I actually shrunk 1.5 centimeters while I was playing her, because her neck is not as long as mine, and I wanted to kind of diminish that. And then I went for my medical for my next film, and the nurse was writing down my height, and I said, no, that's wrong. And she was like, well, actually, it's 1 centimeter less than that, but I rounded it up. And I was like, oh, okay.
That's amazing.
And so that was a surprise. But I guess that's cool, because it shows that a character sort of can really live in your body, you know. But there was the smoking, and then the way she angled her head because of the eye patch, and the way that you look around a room and you've got an eye patch on. Everything was different, and I thought there's no point channeling. It also, if I do the voice, if I commit to the voice, if the voice comes out of my physicality, it's not going to be believable. It all has to come out of her physicality, and it was incredibly exciting. You know, it was a really exciting time, and I watched hours of footage of her and weird still images to come alive. My trailer plastered with images of her, some from her friends and some from news footage, and if you stare at a still image enough, it kind of comes to life, and you work out how they got into that position, or, you know. And she always, she just had the most. There was this photograph, and I put it in the film, where, you know, she's leaning against a wall, and most of us will lean with our arms. She has her fingers like a kind of funny claw against the wall, and you know, all I've got is a still image of that, but I really wanted to, you know, have a moment of that in the film, and it was really exciting work, actually.
And was it her biographer who said that when she saw your walk, she realized it was Marie's walk, and she had never even really noticed?
Yeah, she did say that. Yeah, she did. Lindsay Hilsum, who's another foreign correspondent for Channel 4 News, and it was a great friend of Marie's, and has now written a biography of her. Yeah, she said that. She said she wished, after seeing the film, that she'd written more about her physicality in her biography, which was nice. Because I saw it. I suppose you look at different things when you're an actor, and to me, it just seemed like someone's whole life was in their bones, really.
I have to talk about working with Jamie Dornan, because you guys are so wonderful in this movie together, and it's just a really refreshing relationship to see.
Yeah, it's unusual, I think, because you know, we're really proud that there's this relationship between a man and a woman that's not based on sex.
Exactly.
And yet it's very, and yet it's very sort of meaningful. And it was really one of the healthiest relationships that Marie had with a man.
Right.
She didn't have she was always too, she was such a romantic. She wanted the big, fierce, combustive love affairs that, you know, burned brightly and burnt out. She wanted to be Martha Gellhorn to someone's Hemingway, you know. And she found that, but it never brought her lasting happiness. But this relationship with Paul, and Paul Conroy, who Jamie plays, and he really does play him brilliantly. And I think if Paul Conroy was allowed into the United States, he would probably either be here with me now or be at one of our screenings. But sadly, if you've been in Iraq, Syria, Libya since 2001, you can't come into the United States. And it was so funny because I was filling in my own Esther because I haven't got a visa, an O1 at the moment. And it was like, have you been in Iraq? So I was like, yes. I was like, no, I haven't. I've been in Jordan. But it got so sort of real at some point that I feel I've been to all these places. But I haven't, so I am still allowed in. But Paul, the real Paul Conroy, who Jamie was like a brother to, I mean, those two got on so well. And that's one of the great things about it being Jamie, because Jamie is such a warm, lovely, he's just a great soul of a man, and he and Paul Conroy got on incredibly well. And so Paul, who was coming out in an advisory capacity for a week on our set, stayed the whole shoot and sort of didn't go home. I think he found something in our kind of tribe on the road, something that he felt when he was on the move with a lot of journalists.
Yeah.
You know, there's a kind of, you know, there's a parallel to the being away from home and united in a common endeavour, and it was meaningful. And of course, you know, he was there, so when we came to do the stuff in Homs at the end, you know, that broadcast that Marie does on CNN, which many people have heard, nobody's seen what that room was, and I find it so extraordinary that she kept that calm and, you know, that sort of direct communication with Anderson Cooper across the Skype line when the walls were literally falling around her and the building was shuddering and bombs were falling, and she kept that focus, and the sort of selflessness of that act, I think, is so beautiful. But no one had been in that room, and of course with this film you get to go in the room, and Paul was able to tell us exactly how it was staged, where they were sitting and what it was like, and yeah.
I do want to take some questions from the audience if you have one. Let's start right down here.
Just by accident, this is the second time I've seen this film.
Oh, did you come to the wrong screening?
I lost my parking ticket at another screening, and they were like, well, you can pay $20 for a lost ticket or $12 for a movie ticket. And I just figured, well, this looks interesting. So, and I got in late because I was dealing with that decision, so I didn't get into it until you entered the field in Sri Lanka. So that was where I actually picked up. But it was even more impactful for me emotionally the second time watching it, and not just because I missed the beginning. I knew everything was happening. So if it affected me that way, I wondered if you deal with any kind of PTSD just from shooting a film or emotionally, you know, is there any if you can share, you don't have to.
And
is it hard to watch the film? I'm curious.
Some of the film I watch and I still feel it in my body. I think that, you know, empirically in my mind, you know, I know that it's pretending. Is it though? Is it? That's always the big question, isn't it? Is it pretending? Because I think if you trick your mind strongly enough, then your body produces all the chemicals that it would be producing if the situation was real. So I think your heart races and you sweat and you get flooded with feelings and you cry and, you know, and I think your body, you know, when I'm talking about it now, I'm feeling it. So that's in me somewhere, isn't it? I don't know, really. I mean, in some ways it's part of the mystery that I don't want to sort of investigate too strongly, because I feel if I question it, or it'll evaporate or something, you know. There's the feeling. I mean, it's when our work gets the most exciting, I think. But it's also possibly where it gets the most dangerous, I think.
Are there parts of Marie that you would like to keep? Because she was a badass.
Oh, and she was so
Yeah.
funny. I mean, she was so funny. That's the other thing. Marie's glorious sense of humour is just one of the things, you know. And Paul was greatly helped in that. You know, that when the bombs are falling, we have that sort of silly conversation about, you know, last time I booked a holiday on the internet. Oh, we should have gone to Aleppo.
Right.
You know, all of that, which is, you know, very, very Marie. That kind of black humour, and she really was a very, very funny person. And there were, in the original script, there were more scenes of kind of some sort of her at parties in London, you know, telling some very funny stories. But what happened is we filmed all the Jordan stuff first and achieved all this level of, you know, reality really with these people. And suddenly, any scene that felt too written, it didn't work anymore because we touched something a bit deeper. I think.
There's one in the back.
I know you've done a lot of films where you play very brave people. I was just wondering how you felt about bravery first.
Courage is definitely one of the qualities that attracts me more than any other, I think, to people. I find it so beautiful, especially when it's not fearlessness. You know, someone like Marie had tremendous fear, but she felt that her commitment to what she was doing was so strong that it was worth it. You know, Syria, for instance, when she went into Homs, everybody, many of her colleagues said, Marie, that is too dangerous, that is beyond our red line. And she said, you know, it's so anger-making, it's worth it. And she definitely experienced fear, a very, very strong fear. But, you know, felt always, if I don't do it, who will? And I think it's always interesting to explore why someone feels the need to exhibit courage. You know, I think she was still fighting against her father, really, in some ways. You know, the man she so desperately wanted to impress, and always thought she had time to mend her rift with. And then he died while she was at Yale, and she never got to repair that rift. And I sometimes think she was running, you know, at the point where other people turned back, she ran deeper in all the time. But then she also was someone who was chaotic in her private life. And sometimes you get a chaotic person who then goes into a situation where chaos reigns, and paradoxically they calm down, you know? But yeah, courage is a quality that I'm really drawn to. We were talking outside about the film I made with David Yellower called A United Kingdom, which was a beautiful little film, and also another time I played somebody real, but without the obligation that I felt in this film to really embody her sort of skin and bone. But that was courage that attracted me to that woman, Ruth Williams, too.
Let's take one more down here.
With Matthew being a documentary director, was there sort of leeway with the script as far as when you were filming?
Leeway with the script, since Matthew was
Obviously,
a
you talked about
documentary
like
director.
gigging was only a one shot, so like some of that.
Well, it wasn't a one shot, it was a sort of one evolving encounter with the scene. So it's just the movement of camera through the world. But there was scripted things in there, like when the you know, there seemed to be militia come down to say, stop taking photographs, and what are you doing? And Marie says, you know, have some respect, have some. Actually, that line wasn't in there when I say that. That was something I'd heard her say in the field. But there was some leeway. I mean, you know, we had a lovely script to work with by RSML. But Matt has a tendency to leave the camera running when the scene is over, technically over, and so then you have to carry on, you know. And it's because he created an atmosphere where it felt real. It was always quite easy to carry on, or it was just whether it was you doing it or whether it was just doing you, but it would carry on. So yeah, there was some leeway.
Did you keep anything from the set? Like, I don't know, for some reason I keep wondering what happened to her eye patch.
Oh yeah, I've got some eye patches.
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah, I've got some. The really awful thing that happened was that Paul Conroy gave me Marie's lighter to use in the film, her Zippo. And it was a Zippo which had been someone who served in Vietnam's Zippo before it was Marie's, and it had a map of Vietnam on the back. And then she'd had engraved on the other side, "You've never really lived until you've nearly died." And I had that all the way through the film, and on about our second last day, it was stolen. And it was the most awful, awful thing. No idea. I mean, we just made so many pleas to, you know, if this happened to kind of come into your pocket, just drop it back in a safe place anonymously, and it never came back.
I mean, well, it's great though that we have this amazing testament to her. I think, you know, I think she'd be really flattered if she was allowed flattery. I don't know.
I think she'd really love the fact that the people that she sought to cover get to speak in their own words. I think that's something that Matt gave Marie that is so vital to kind of who she was, really.
And I do want to remind people this movie is in theaters right now, so please spread the word.
How long did it take to film? How long did it take to film?
About 35 days, I think. We did about 5 weeks in Jordan and about 3.5 weeks in London.
So please let everyone know it's in theaters now. Spread the word. Thank you so much.